Hello and welcome to Ward Talk, CTN's look at the political scene in Ann Arbor. I'm your host, Bonnie Gabowitz. We'll be discussing issues and solutions with the City Council members from our 5 wards on the 3rd Wednesday of each month. Joining us is Jack Eaton from Ward 4. Welcome, Jack.
Thank you, Bonnie. It's a pleasure to be here.
And this is the month of February. We've just begun 2019. I know Ward 4 has a lot of the same concerns and issues that the whole city has. So let's just talk about some of the forefront issues right now that's not only facing Ward 4 residents, but also the city. When we talk about our environmental issues, I know there's been a delay in really having the solid waste program in place, working efficiently. It's been a couple of years that it's been in transition. So where are we at with that?
Well, let's back up a little bit. In 2017, our solid waste master plan expired, and there was nothing in place to renew it or update it. And
like a plan B.
Yeah. And at the same time, the whole issue of solid waste, especially recycling, was going through a lot of turmoil. The market for materials to recycle into new products has just bottomed out. And during that period when the market was affecting our revenues, the contractor that we had hired to operate our material recovery facility started taking in more materials from other sources, trying to make up for the lack of revenue from those materials, and over time damaged the equipment that we had in our material recovery facility.
So this was equipment that the city owned?
We owned the facility and all of the equipment in it, but we contracted out the operation. And that contract called for the operator, the contractor, and the city to share the costs of upkeep and maintenance. And I think both parties dropped the ball. And in the past, we had people on staff who were experts in solid waste and especially recycling. And over time, retirements and departures just left us without anybody that had that expertise. And we weren't really keeping an eye on the process. And so while we should have been reviewing our solid waste master plan and keeping an eye on our operations, it all kind of went sideways on us. And we have now hired a consultant at a high price, $250,000, to conduct a study that we should get back sometime mid-2019 that will advise us on how to go forward on our plans.
So what company is now doing the work?
So after the MRF failed, MRF is short for material recovery facility. After the MRF broke, we terminated that contract and bid out that work, and Recycle Ann Arbor is now operating the MRF. And to the extent that we do anything, basically we aggregate the materials and then they ship it to Cincinnati, where it's sorted and sent out to buyers who will recycle it into new products.
And I don't think that a lot of people might know that what we are recycling actually has to be transported a distance to be dealt with.
So historically, we've had a cutting-edge recycling program. We are out ahead of many communities, and now our goal is to get back to just where we were, which was collecting, sorting, and selling our materials, to end up in new products. And instead, we're spending an extreme amount of money to ship this to another facility. And we're depleting our solid waste fund balance. We've put aside a lot of money in the past because we knew we'd have to do some upgrades to our capital purchases. And we're depleting that rather rapidly. And we don't necessarily know how or when we're going to fix the recycling. At the same time, we're running into just fundamental problems with trash pickup. As the downtown develops into basically a collection of restaurants and coffee shops and bars, that changes the nature of the trash that they generate, and it's really ripe to institute organic recycling, composting, collect it, take it out to our compost center.
There is a compost program.
We have a great compost. And what we need to do is make sure that all of the organics that are generated downtown in restaurants, restaurants are notorious for having a lot of waste, end up not in a landfill, but being composted and generating, good compost material.
Are there incentives for businesses to do the composting?
Well, we're doing nothing at this moment. I'm not sure it's even available to them. So they have problems with an overabundance of trash in the alleys downtown that's kind of a crisis. At the same time that we're not addressing the organic material that we could be diverting from the landfills, and at the same time that we're not addressing the residential recycling in a meaningful way, and we're months away from having recommendations made by our expensive consultant. And yet simultaneously we're talking about looking at a county-wide solid waste plan. I think it's premature to talk about that before we get the recommendations back from our consultant. But we have a lot of problems, and we're not doing anything in the short term to address those immediate problems, much less do we have a long-term vision yet.
So this really sounds like a long-term study, and in terms of making changes and improving its ways down the line. And meanwhile, we're treading water.
So this is mostly a product of us not updating our solid waste master plan in a timely fashion. And instead of using the methods we've used in the past, which is just to have a citizens committee with a couple of experts from the industry, helping them, we've gone out and hired a consultant to do the entirety of the plan. In the past, we've had excellent solid waste plans that were authored by citizen groups for free. And if we'd done it in a timely fashion, we could have done that again. And I don't have an explanation as to why our previous master plan was allowed to expire without a plan to renew it.
Now, the master plan, is it reviewed every so many years?
Yes. Yeah. So, like I said, it expired in 2017. I think that one was written in 2012. So it had a 5-year lifespan. That's what they were projecting. They were saying, this is our plan for what we're going to do for the next 5 years.
And yet, if you look at the last 5 years, there's been tremendous growth in residential, multi-unit housing in the downtown area especially, as well as new businesses, so that adds to it.
Yeah, so the population of Ann Arbor has gone from, I think, 112,000 in 2010 to an estimated, 120, 122,000 now. So that's considerable growth, and a lot of it is in dense areas. So we're establishing dense populations in the downtown area without having a real good response to the trash and the problems that are generated with that density.
So do you think this needs to be more of a consideration when a builder comes along and proposes a new building in the area? Is that something that needs to be looked at more carefully?
I really think that it's a problem from the service provider. We need to be ready to pick up the trash that they generate. They all have to have a design in place where a truck can back up or drive forward and, empty the dumpster. That's all part of their plan. It's just a matter of adding all of that to the congestion we already have downtown. The alleys and sidewalks, really, in some areas downtown are where the trash pickup happens. And so we haven't addressed the additional businesses that are the kind of businesses that are moving in downtown adequately in our trash.
So do you see this problem mainly in the downtown area rather than the suburban areas?
Well, the downtown problem is one aspect of an issue that we have to address. But throughout the city, we really need to be moving towards a zero waste. You know, we want to divert as much trash from landfills to reuse or composting as we can. And you know, if you consider what percentage of trash really doesn't belong in a landfill, we should be doing a better job. We just basically dropped the ball.
And this is one aspect. We've used the whole first half of the show just talking about this. So this will be an issue that we'll definitely be following in definitely the rest of the year, I guess.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, and there are others, environmental issues that when we come back we'll be discussing. Right now the water quality is a big concern, so we'll pick that up.
All right.
Great. We want to hear from you, so please email us questions to ctn@a2gov.org or tweet us at #CTN in Arbor. We're taking a break now, and we'll be coming back with more from Ward 4.
In Ann Arbor, we stop for pedestrians at crosswalks. Period. It's the law.
Hi, I'm Bonnie Gabowitz, and this is Ward Talk. We're talking with Jack Eaton from Ward 4, and we had this wonderful, very interesting conversation about the solid waste. It's something we don't usually talk about on this show, but there is another topic we have been covering, and that has to do with the water quality and the discovery that the PFAS, is that how you pronounce it?
I pronounce it PFAS.
Yeah, PFAS. But those very definite chemicals that do not go away once they're in your body, that is in our water system. And I know the city has been doing some things to help deal with the problem. So let's first start with what has the city been doing and what is still in front of us.
So we have excellent staff that takes care of our drinking water. They're on top of a variety of things. The multitude of things that they test for in our drinking water is evolving. You know, so recently we've started testing for biological matters, and they test for contamination from pharmaceuticals and whatnot.
Is this something that's new that
Well,
they hadn't done?
when I say new, I you know, probably 10 years.
Okay,
But
okay.
the list of things that they test for has been building over the short term compared to what it used to be about. There are so many things that we now know the significance of. And so PFAS is a collection of different chemicals, you know, and they're typically introduced into water from industrial sites, you know. So when you buy a nonstick pan, that company used PFAS chemicals in the processing of that pan, and water repellent clothing and things like that. And so it's kind of everywhere, and over the last 10 years, the sophistication of our water testing has improved.
And the water testing is it done monthly or weekly?
At least monthly. But I think randomly it's done on a persistent basis because we want to know what's in our water. Now PFAS was a challenge because it's dangerous at such low levels. You know, so when we talk about the dioxin plume, we're talking about parts per billion with a B. With PFAS, it's parts per trillion with a T. So that's not a very significant portion of the water, and just testing down to parts per trillion, it wasn't happening, you know, 10 years ago. But now the testing is getting more sophisticated as time passes. And we're ever so much more aware of the health threats. So just in the last year or so, we were talking about 70 parts per trillion being, you know, the threshold for danger. And yet the state legislature right now is talking about lowering that threshold to 10 parts per trillion. Our drinking water has less than 10 parts per trillion. But because we really don't know how dangerous it is, we know it's dangerous, potentially dangerous. Whether or not 10 parts per trillion is really where that threshold should be is unknown. At the same time, as we've developed the ability to test down to parts per trillion, our city staff has been very good at being ahead of the standard and treating our water so that we are safe as humanly possible to do. You know.
Would you say that the incident in Flint and all the uproar of how they dealt with the water, did that initiate more overseeing of our water once that came out? Did that affect our calendar and how we test?
Our city staff who worries about the quality of our drinking water didn't need that to prompt them to do the right thing. But I do think that it has made residents of the city ever so much more aware and really question whether 70 is the right number or 10 or 5 or 0, you know. So bringing it out into the public discussion so that the policymakers have to take a close look at what we're doing and make sure that the policymakers understand the importance of funding the cleanup effort is good. So I would say that Flint did have a good impact on public perception and on policymaker perception, so that it's a high priority for us.
And what is the city doing now? I understand there's an effort to put in filters to have the water in better condition. So what kind of filters are we talking about?
So I'm not a scientist, but my understanding is that we've always used charcoal to filter our water. And by using a different kind, it increases our capacity to remove PFAS type chemicals from the water. And so last year, City Council authorized, I think, $1 million expenditure to upgrade our current carbon filters to a better kind. And they're phasing that in. So 1/3 of those filters have been replaced. And
so that's ongoing.
Yeah, and over the next couple months, they will be replacing all of them, and then that will improve their ability to trap the PFAS, and we won't be drinking as much. But we're going to have to continue to look at all available methods. And I think that this is going to become more of a concern across the water quality industry in general. There are other areas of this state where there's ever so much more PFAS in the groundwater. And so it's a developing science. And we have to make sure that we continue to pay attention so that residents can drink, tap water with confidence.
And people who have wells, do they have more of a responsibility to check their water? Is that something the city does for them?
Inside the city, I don't believe that anybody has drinking water wells anymore. In part because of the Gelman plume, the dioxin that's in the groundwater. There's a prohibition area where you simply are prohibited from having a well. And most every residence in town is connected to city water. And so to that
So that's not really an issue.
But in the surrounding area, especially towards the north and towards the river where the Gelman plume is moving, and actually moving west as well, the DEQ, the state environmental quality agency, does test well water on request, or as the plume moves, they try to stay out ahead of it and assure that people's drinking water is safe.
And is the plume, it's continuing to move ever so slowly, but there is still movement that's being detected?
It is moving steadily. I'm not sure I'd say slowly, because we really don't know. We only know the movement where there are actually testing wells. So the polluter was required to put in monitoring wells, but the plume moves in mysterious ways. You can't really predict where it's going to be, and so simply because we don't have a well here or there doesn't mean that it didn't, the plume didn't move past, the general area of that we consider polluted. It just means it wasn't detected by the wells that we do have. And so one of the things that we're seeking, the city has joined the litigation against the polluter. One of the things that we're seeking is more monitoring wells and better access to data so that we understand where it's going. Now, as it moves from the edge of town, which is relatively higher altitude, the topography, towards the river, near West Park, that's a lower altitude, and so the plume is actually closer to the surface. And the state has started doing some testing of near surface water there that they hadn't been doing in the past.
So there is continuous monitoring and reporting going on.
There is monitoring, but it's only in fits and starts. I don't believe that the state is doing enough monitoring of near ground stormwater in the West Park area. They've done a little bit, but certainly not enough. Unless we really have a good idea of where it's going and how close it is to the surface, you don't know whether or not your damp basement also has dioxin in that dampness. And unlike PFAS, dioxin is dangerous regardless of how you come into contact, whether it's your skin, if it vaporizes, like through evaporation, you can breathe it in, drinking, and so although it takes more of it, parts per billion to be dangerous, because almost any kind of exposure poses a danger, we need to do better measuring of it.
Well, we'll definitely be watching that. In the couple of minutes we have left, I know there were a couple of other items that you considered important to discuss. There was a little bit of information about the train proposal. We're still looking at possibly developing a new train station. The city had determined, you have a definite decision as to where it will be, or is that still in discussion?
No. So where we are currently is we have submitted a proposed environmental assessment plan for the site that is previously identified as our preference, which is the Fuller Road site. And
that's by the university,
yes,
the hospital.
It's across the street from the Fuller Park swimming pool, just down the hill from the hospital. And so the city staff our consultant and the Federal Rail Administration have been going back and forth trying to get a environmental assessment approved. It's not approved yet. And in that process, there has to be a finding of no significant impact because it proposes to use parkland. And just recently, through a Freedom of Information Act disclosure, we learned that the Federal Rail Administration considers the price tag on our proposed station to be an order of magnitude more expensive than they typically fund. And that should concern us. Because if they're unwilling to fund their portion, then we simply can't afford it. You know, I think that the price tag...
Is there a certain percentage that they offer to fund?
In the past, there have been projects that were funded 80%. More often now, the Federal Rail Administration looks for a locality to have a private partner to free up federal funding, or they funded at like 60% federal and 40% local. And that would put a big burden on us because the price tag on that train station is now somewhere between $86 and $100 million. You know, 20% of $100 million is a lot of dollars, a lot of local dollars, and it should be daunting.
Yeah.
There are some of us who believe that the current rail station site is sufficient, that we could work with the private partner of DTE, which is right across the track, as they develop their property, and they showed interest in being our partner. Nonetheless, we went this other direction. But I don't think it's too late to go back and ask if they're still willing to partner. Mostly what we need at the current site is additional parking and some way to get over the train tracks without climbing stairs.
Well, the issues we've talked about today are all on a continuum, so we'll definitely be pursuing more information each month as we go along. And it's been a pleasure talking to you, and it's been very helpful updating a lot of detail on these very important topics.
Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Remember to join us for a new episode every third Wednesday of the month. We want to hear from you, so please email us at ctn@a2gov.org, attention Word Talk. You can also follow CTN and ask questions on Twitter at twitter.com/CTN in Arbor. We'll make sure to include your questions. For Ward Talk, I'm Bonnie Gabowitz. Until next month.